Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with the major political news ahead of the New Hampshire primary tomorrow night. Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the Republican presidential race after finishing a distant second in the Iowa caucuses, and now he's throwing his support behind former President Donald Trump.
It's clear to me that a majority of Republican primary voters want to give Donald Trump another chance. They watch his presidency get stymied by relentless resistance, and they see Democrats using lawfare this day to attack him.
Ron DeSantis made his announcement in a post on X. Former President Trump says he appreciates the Florida governor's endorsement.
He ran a really good campaign, I will tell you. It's not easy. They think it's easy doing this stuff, right? It's not easy.
And now, with DeSantis out of the race, that leaves former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley as the last standing Trump alternative. A new CNN University of New Hampshire poll shows Trump with 50% support in the Granite State. Haley comes in second at 39%.
And Nathan, with the DeSantis withdrawal from the race, Nikki Haley is stepping up the direct attacks on Donald Trump. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter with that part of the story.
She is really focusing on Trump's mental acuity. She says he's not the same man now that he was when she served in his cabinet.
So I always told him what I thought was in the best interest of the country when I was in his cabinet. But this is different. I mean, we're seeing he's just not at the same level he was at 2016. I think we're seeing some of that decline. But more than that, what I'll say is focus on the fact that no matter what it is, chaos follows him.
Trump has responded that he feels mentally stronger than he did 25 years ago. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. And while Trump is favored to be the Republican nominee, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, a vocal critic of the former president, says Republicans need a new voice.
Because of that Trump brand, we've lost in 2018 and 2020. And 2022, I'm so tired of losing, and I'm tired of losers, and I think we're just tired of that brand that just drags the rest of the Republican Party down, right? What's the point of scraping out a win in the presidency if you lose everything else, like he has, time and time and time again?
New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu says Nikki Haley can sustain her presidential campaign into the next round of Republican primaries, even without a win in New Hampshire.
And after tomorrow's New Hampshire primary, it's on to the Nevada caucus and then to South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state. Bloomberg's Laura Davison is in New Hampshire covering the Republican primary.
The question, though, really is what happens after New Hampshire? You know, going into South Carolina, which I'll note is her home state. Trump is leading. So this is really a question of, okay, you can do well on Tuesday. What is the long game here?
Bloomberg's Laura Davison reports Nikki Haley is launching a $4 million ad campaign in her home state the day after the New Hampshire primary to try to convince South Carolina voters her campaign will have staying power.
And, Amy, we're going to have much more on the New Hampshire primary and the rest of the GOP race in just a minute. But we now turn to the latest developments in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected what he says are unacceptable terms presented by Hamas for a new hostage deal. Here's Netanyahu speaking through an interpreter.
Hamas is demanding, in exchange for the release of our hostages, the end of the war, the withdrawal of our forces from Gaza. Were we to agree to this, our soldiers would have fallen in vain, and the next October 7th would only be a question of time.
Public and political pressure to bring those hostages back home has been rapidly increasing over the past several days. Over the weekend, family members demonstrated in front of Netanyahu's private residence.
And we turn our attention now to financial markets. Early indications signal the record rally on Wall Street will continue. Futures are higher. We begin a new trading week on Friday. The S&P 500 index finished at an all-time high for the first time in 2 years. This week's earnings will continue to be a dominant theme. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
We'll be hearing from companies across a broad swath of industries amid questions about how firms and their customers have dealt with high interest rates. Emily Rowland is co-chief investment strategist at JH Investments.
So what companies are dealing with now, of course, is a much higher cost of capital as rates have gone up at the same time that revenue growth is shrinking. So those margins are really getting challenged here. And the key for companies from here is who can manage that best in an environment where it's going to become a lot more difficult.
Among the names reporting this week, 3M, American Express, Blackstone, AT&T, Northrop Grumman, Norfolk Southern, Union Pacific, T-Mobile, and Visa. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Charlie, thank you. Now, two major Wall Street firms are recommending investors start buying 5-year U.S. notes after they saw their worst rout since May last week. Morgan Stanley sees scope for a rebound in treasuries on the idea that data in the coming weeks could surprise to the downside. And J.P. Morgan says yields have already climbed to levels last seen in December.
And in company news, the Federal Aviation Administration is recommending airlines inspect another type of Boeing 737 aircraft that also had mid-exit door plugs. That's the same type that ultimately failed in an Alaska Airlines blowout earlier this month. Boeing said in a statement that it fully supports the FAA and our customers in this action.
And we're going to be watching shares of Macy's today, Amy. The department store chain says it is not interested in a bid from Arkhouse Management and Brigade Capital Management to take over the department store chain. The investors made a $5.8 billion offer for the company last month. Yesterday, Arkhouse threatened to take its offer to shareholders if Macy's doesn't step up negotiations.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. Good morning, John.
Amy, good morning. While Republicans focus on the New Hampshire primary, Democrats are zeroing in on abortion rights. Let's get more in this report from Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will be headlining an abortion rights rally in Virginia this week. Biden's campaign says the event will underscore what's at stake for reproductive freedom in 2024 and communicate the president's commitment to codifying the protections of Roe into law. The campaign is also releasing television ads this week to run in battleground states marking the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Democrats are seeking to tie the issue to former President Donald Trump and his appointment of conservative Supreme Court justices that made Roe's overturn possible in the first place. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden expressing confidence the Senate could work out an emerging bipartisan border compromise as soon as this week. Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman tells ABC both sides are trying to move forward.
We do need to have a much more orderly immigration process that increases the amount of lawful immigration through visas and other more routinized scheduled forms. And we also need to fix our asylum process.
Congressional Republicans have demanded a crackdown on immigration in exchange for supporting a $110 billion package that includes funds for Ukraine and Israel. It faces a rougher time in the House. Former President Trump will be in New York today to appear for his second trial for defaming columnist E. Jean Carroll. Last week, Trump was threatened with expulsion from the court, making comments about what he called a con job. Hundreds of thousands of Germans flooded the streets over the weekend, including in front of the National Parliament, protest against far-right extremism and the rise of the anti-immigration AfD party. The protests follow the recent revelation of a meeting at which senior AfD politicians and members of the main opposition Christian Democrats discussed a remigration scheme that echoed Nazi policies of the 1930s. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Amy.
All right. Thank you, John. And we bring you news throughout the day here on Bloomberg Radio. But now you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update. For that, we bring in John Stashower.
Amy, the NFL playoffs are down to the Final Four. The conference championship games this Sunday will have in the AFC the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs in Baltimore. The NFC title game will be the surprising Detroit Lions at San Francisco. The Lions hadn't won a playoff game in 32 years. Now they've won 2 in 2 weeks. They get their 14th win of the season. 31-23 over Tampa Bay. Detroit never trailed. Tampa Bay tied the game 3 different times, but then the Lions won it with touchdown drives in the fourth quarter that covered 75 and 89 yards. A classic in Buffalo. The last 5 scores produced 5 lead changes. The Chiefs took the lead a minute into the fourth quarter. The last 14 minutes of the game was scoreless. Didn't look like that would be the case as Tyler Bass lined up for a game-tying 44-yard field goal with 1:47 left. He missed it wide right, and the Chiefs again beat the Bills in the playoffs, 27-24. Patrick Mahomes has now beaten Josh Allen 3 times in the postseason, though he's 0-3 against him in the regular season. NBA, the Wizards brought in the defending NBA champion Denver Nuggets, and Nikola Jokic, 42 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists. Nuggets won 113-104. Celtics, coming off their first home loss of the season, went to Houston and won 116-107. Kristaps Porzingis scored 32. Alex Zverev, a fourth-round win at the Australian Open over Cam Norrie. He won at 7-6 in the fifth set. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager on a morning where it is now down to 2 in the Republican presidential race. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has dropped his bid for the 2024 nomination. He is endorsing Donald Trump, the frontrunner ahead of tomorrow night's New Hampshire primary. But Nikki Haley is hoping an upset in the Granite State will propel her into her home state of South Carolina, just holding its own primary next month. We'll get the latest on the ground from Manchester in just a moment. But first, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu tells Bloomberg's Joe Matthew and Kayleigh Lines why he's throwing his support behind Nikki Haley rather than former President Donald Trump.
Let's start here. Imagine if you're the former president. In your own party, you can barely get 50% of the vote. That's why Trump's in trouble, right? So now that you have somebody new on the scene, kind of building that kind of momentum is huge. And the key is that it's a one-on-one race. So if Trump can barely hold 50% or keep him under 50% in a one-on-one race, well, the math says that there's 51% to Nikki Haley, and that's what you need to win a state. Now, I don't think any of these early states are must-wins for Haley. I don't think that's ever been the case. They're possible, but they're not must-wins. I think when you get to Super Tuesday, okay, now you really have to start winning states, obviously. But as long as she keeps building on that momentum, I think there's a lot of opportunity. She has money, she has resources, she has, knows how to win in New Hampshire, knows how to win in South Carolina. So all the wind is at her back.
Annie Custer sat in this chair a short time ago and said, we want you to write in Joe Biden. There's a write-in campaign for the president of the United States, which is remarkable. But she said, if not, vote for Nikki. Just don't vote for Trump. When you have a Democrat talking like this and Donald Trump across the street saying Democrats are infiltrating the process here to vote for Nikki
Democrats cannot vote. Democrats cannot vote in New Hampshire.
Of course they
Well, you say, of course, I had other stations. I mean, you guys get it, but I had other stations being like, talking about Democrats vote. Democrats are not voting in the Republican primary at all.
But this idea that Democrat-leaning independents are going to make a difference here in New Hampshire, and there aren't enough New Hampshires to keep doing that across the country.
Yeah, well, independents have always been able to vote in our process, both Democrat and Republican. And they're not independents in New Hampshire. They're undeclared.
Of course.
So you can have hard Trump supporters and hard Bernie Sanders socialists within the undeclared spectrum. This year, they're more likely to play on the Republican side because there's nobody cares about the Democrat side. So that's all. So you're just going to see a lot more folks play there. And they tend to want change. That's it. They want the next new thing. They want, there's the Republicans that are within that independent group really are Republicans, right? They understand Trump doesn't carry Republican values. Was he fiscally conservative? No. He had tax cuts that supposedly helped the economy, but then borrowed $7 trillion to do it. That's like saying to your family, hey, look at this wonderful new house we're living in, and you just paid for it on a credit card, right? It's a falsehood. He doesn't believe in limited government. He believes in this kind of dictatorship. He doesn't believe in local control. He believes in Washington. So those are not Republican values. So I think a lot of the Republicans within that undeclared and those conservatives are very much coming over to Nikki's side.
Would it be fair, Governor, to say the Republican Party that Trump represents is not your Republican Party, not the Republican Party of your father?
Put it this way. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that says, I don't vote Republican, I just vote Trump. He's his own entity. He doesn't define the Republican Party at all.
But you have said because if he were to be the Republican nominee and because you are a Republican, you would support him.
Yeah, I think most people would. That shouldn't surprise anybody. Yeah.
Even though you don't think he actually carries the values of the Republican Party?
Well, look, Joe Biden, that's how bad Joe Biden is. I mean, I always say that. I mean, this is what has happened with inflation and all of that. The one thing I suppose that I'm hopeful, again, I'm hopeful it's Nikki. I think she can do it. Any Republican would build a much better team than Joe Biden. I mean, the team that Joe Biden has put in there and with the rules and the regulations that are just crushing families, they're just crushing locals and state governments, and nothing can be developed, nothing can be built, nothing can move forward. So, no, look, I'm excited about Nikki Haley being the nominee. That's why we're here in New Hampshire. This is where I don't want to say it all turns around because she's already made the turnaround, right? It's already gone from 13 candidates to a one-on-one race. That in itself is amazing. amazing. This is where, again, she just keeps adding kind of gasoline to that fire and keeps driving forward.
You talk about Trump team building. Of course, most of Trump's team has come out against him following the administration. Many of them
that should tell you
fired
something
on Twitter.
Yeah.
But so, the quality of a team might only be as strong as long as you can keep it together. But I want to hear the argument, though. You're prepared to vote for Donald Trump if it's a Trump-Biden election. You've made
According
that clear.
to the polls, most of America would. I mean, he beats Biden.
But you're trying to keep that from happening.
Yeah.
Why is Nikki Haley, let's talk about your candidate, better for New Hampshire than Donald Trump?
So in the latest polls, New Hampshire hasn't gone Republican in the general election in about 20 years. And then the latest polls show that Trump gets crushed in New Hampshire against Biden. Nikki wins. Right. Nikki allows the Republicans in New Hampshire to win this state again in November. And that would happen in a lot of states across the country.
And that's New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu speaking with Bloomberg Balance of Power hosts Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines ahead of the New Hampshire primary coming up tomorrow night. And joining us now from New Hampshire is Bloomberg's Laura Davison, part of our political team covering the First in the Nation primary coming up on Tuesday. Great to have you with us dark and early this morning, Laura. Give us a sense of where this race stands now with Ron DeSantis bowing out.
So this is really a two-person race. Nikki Haley predicted last week coming out of Iowa it would be. She was a little bit mocked because people were like, wait, you came in third and DeSantis is in second. But turns out if you wait a couple of days, it turned out to be true. Haley is across the state all day with a series of events. Trump, for his part, will have one rally tonight. He's been getting long lines and big crowds with those.
So it sounds as though both sides are finding some support depending on their supporters in this race. Where do you see the momentum? Is it behind former President Trump? Is it behind former Governor Haley in this New Hampshire race?
Yeah, so Haley has been, in recent days, you've seen sort of a climb in some of her poll numbers. The two polls that just came out last night were not the best for Haley. She was coming in, roughly, mid to high 30s percentage, and Trump was just at 50 or 51%. So that's a 15-point gap. That's outside the margin of error. And that is the kind of gap that is hard to make up on Election Day with just having strong turnout.
Well, there is this idea in New Hampshire that they have an independent-minded electorate. There are a lot of independents, a lot of undeclared candidates who can vote in this race. As Governor Sununu noted, obviously, Democrats who are registered for the party cannot. Could that kind of support, that sort of independent, undeclared support, give Haley the kind of momentum that perhaps the polls don't show at this point?
It certainly could. I was speaking with a Republican strategist who I'll note was working to back Haley's campaign. But he noted that the polls in New Hampshire are notoriously not great because of the system where you have undeclareds who can come off the sidelines and vote for either team on Election Day. So their basically theory of the case is that there are people who are either, maybe would have voted Democratic, maybe would not have voted at all, or new voters who have come off the sidelines who were not excited about Biden, not excited about Trump, but will be for Nikki Haley on Election Day. That's their theory. They think that they can win. They think that they can come across and pull apart some of the DeSantis supporters after he dropped out yesterday. There's not a ton of DeSantis supporters in New Hampshire. He was, somewhere around 6-7% of the electorate if you look at the polls. But kind of conventional wisdom would have that his supporters would go to Trump. Nikki Haley's people say, look, these are people who were wanting a Trump alternative, and now we're the only Trump alternative left.
That would be interesting to see whether some of that support for DeSantis does peel Nikki Haley's way, because as we heard from DeSantis on his X announcement yesterday, he's getting behind the frontrunner, Donald Trump. We have a number of former candidates in this race who have gotten behind Trump as well, including Senator Tim Scott from Haley's home state of South Carolina. I mean, how much do endorsements matter in this New Hampshire race?
For New Hampshire, these endorsements don't matter a whole lot, but you look forward to states like South Carolina, one of the next states on the map, where it is Haley's home state, but Trump is ahead by a lot, and Scott is very popular there. So, Scott endorsing for her competitor Trump is likely to be a headwind for Haley. This is really kind of the issue for Haley. Even if she is able to pull out a win on Tuesday, what happens next? If you look at where the next contest on the map, Super Tuesday is not that far away in early March. She doesn't have more New Hampshires where she can have some of these upsets, which that sort of calls into question the viability of her campaign going forward.
So the calendar could be a headwind for Haley coming up here, but we are hearing as well that there are going to be a lot more fundraisers for Nikki Haley, a lot of Wall Street backing for her campaign as well. How could that add to her momentum potentially?
This certainly helps her, to be able to advertise, to be able to hire door knockers and canvassers, and have the operation that she needs to go forward. We've seen a lot of Wall Street interest from Haley really pick up in the fourth quarter of last year. She had some really strong debate performances, and after that, we saw a lot of fundraisers from a lot of major Republican donors. She got the support of the Koch political network, that's Americans for Prosperity, that's been out, running tens of millions of dollars in advertisements for her, hiring door knockers in the state of New Hampshire. They've spent so far about $3 or $4 million on people, going out and trying to get their neighbors to vote. So money really can make a difference. If you don't have support, it can't necessarily make up a gap. But if you're close, if you're competitive, especially in a place like New Hampshire, that can help put a candidate over the edge.
Got about 30 seconds left, Laura. So what kind of a finish is Nikki Haley's campaign really hoping for here? We heard from Governor Sununu saying she doesn't necessarily need a win to propel her campaign, but what kind of a margin does she need to carry her into South Carolina and on into Super Tuesday?
She needs it to be really, really close. We're talking a couple points, a near virtual tie for her to be able to make the case that she could take on Trump.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.